Trump has floated a controversial plan to Ukraine. Are they willing to trade their rare earth mineral deposits for more military aid? Is this actually not that crazy a plan? Plus, we are going to look at the rising Russian bonuses as the Russian military that Putin's officially says is just flooded with recruits. I guess they're just raising bonuses to an insane level, right? These bonuses are actually higher than the U.S. military bonuses at the height of the Iraq War. But don't worry, guys, Russia definitely isn't having a personnel crisis. Plus, we are going to talk about a corrupt billionaire Russian's son selling coal from inside the occupied Ukraine. And of course, we're going to talk about the Marco Rubio's bizarre deal with El Salvador. Is this even legal? And who is cheering from the sidelines as the United States shutters USAID? I'm Paul, U.S. Army combat veteran. Let's get into it. Okay, so this I thought was one of the most interesting stories is that Donald Trump has said, now again, Trump making a statement is like, should not be taken with a ton of weight. He says he's going to do a lot of things. Sometimes he does the thing he says. Sometimes he does a different thing entirely. Sometimes he does like a half version of that thing. But we should still take his statements fairly seriously. He said that Kiev should trade its rare earth deposits like scandium in exchange for U.S. support, right? And what I find interesting is that Donald Trump has said, listen, they have great rare earth. God bless this guy. And I want the security of the rare earth, and they're willing to do it, right? This is, of course, an echoing Lindsey Graham's statement in February, where Graham suggested that Kiev could help pay back Washington's loans with its vast mineral resources. Now, this is rare earth elements that are used in high-tech components, something that China is very actively trying to get their hands on, right? This is sort of strategic supply chain level stuff. Again, if you can make the chips, you can make the AI-powered weapons of the future, as well as magnets for electric vehicles, wind turbines, smartphones, LED lighting, and display screens, right? All of which are both important to the U.S. economy, which is so tech heavy, and also important to our national defense. So the fact that Ukraine has a ton of these, the fact is that the U.S. likely is saying, listen, we can't have these fall into Russian hands, which is a really interesting sort of perspective. Now, can this make sense? Yeah. Now, there's a bad way and a better way to do this, right? The best way is to sit there and go, listen, we're not going to like make you pay us back these rare earth elements. Instead, what we want to do is just get exclusivity. We want to become the only buyer, and we'll pay market rates or nearly market rates for them. And what we'll do is we'll actually provide the investment in the mining infrastructure and other things in your country. So we'll build out the infrastructure after the war, something that Ukraine is definitely going to be worried about when the war ends, right? So we're going to build the infrastructure. We are going to help or subsidize it more likely. And then we're going to have an exclusivity deal for extraction. Now, this can be pretty fraught, right? Because a lot of times this can be used to exploit countries. But ultimately, it can also be used in a tremendous development deal, right? Look no further, again, than a country like Poland, who's benefited tremendously from sort of entering the EU market and having these factories and other businesses get headquartered in Poland. So that kind of thing can be a tremendous growth engine for an economy, right? And for Ukraine, now they may sit there and go, listen, we don't really have that much of a choice, right? So we may just have to simply take this deal. But for Trump, he doesn't want to feel like he's just giving away money, even though in practical terms, this is something that we explained on this channel earlier, that a prosperous and Western-oriented Ukraine is in all likelihood going to achieve the same thing. They're going to sell their goods to the EU and Western countries, and they're going to exclude autocratic countries that, supported the invasion of them, like China, Russia, and North Korea, and Iran. And so The fact is that Trump is, again, speed running his way to the same conclusion that the establishment did, which is that actually it's pretty valuable to have Ukraine pivot in this Western-facing direction, particularly when their population has said, yo, we want to become a more Westernized democracy, right? With freedom of speech, with free and fair elections, and a free market economy with robust international trade. So the fact is, when somebody says, hey, I want to do this thing, the other party says, hey, we want you in our club, then imagine somebody else going, but did you forget to ask me, Vladimir Putin? I'm like, well, Putin, there's this line on the map that says where Russia is, and you get to decide whatever happens in Russia. And in fact, the West has said, listen, not only do you get control of Russia, but we are going to just cede Central Asia to you. Kazakhstan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, they're all yours. We have minimal presence there. And so this sort of deal is, again, I think can be a version of the existing agreement that was never written out and never had to be. Again, when you sit there and it's a way that economies work, right? Is to sit there and go, listen, the big team works together. And if you're Ukraine, right, let's say it's 10 years from now, peace has been achieved, U.S. companies have helped push to rebuild Ukraine and have a variety of industries headquartered there, including rare earth mineral extraction. And Ukraine is selling them at just hand over fist and is having an economic renaissance. Well, what happens when the U.S. knocks on the door and says, hey, listen, things are pretty tense with China right now. We need you to not sell rare earth minerals to China. Well, what are they going to say? They're going to say, dudes, we don't have a choice. We do so much business with you that why would we ever betray you for someone else? That is the core argument to this, right? To this support. In addition to the more general, support democracies support each other type stuff. But this is a version of that argument. It's like a subparagraph of democracies support each other. Democracies work together and collaborate in ways that autocracies struggle to. It's not anything new. So again, as I always discuss, I want the U.S. administration to run well. I want them to make good policy. And this has the potential to be one of those good policy decisions, even though I think it's kind of already the unofficial policy. Now, Russia, I want to talk, first off, before we talk about Russia's resurgent bonuses, absolutely insane stuff, I wanted to mention that this weekend I got some texts from the Ute Brigade guys who sent me more drone footage from Touretsk. I haven't even reviewed it, but the only place I'm going to drop it is actually on combatvetnews.com. This is, of course, my version of Patreon, where every Tuesday and Thursday I drop uncensored combat videos straight from the front lines. In a lot of cases, it's stuff that doesn't exist anywhere else on the internet because it's sent to me from these units. And of course, if it's the best way to support me, right? The reason I can be critical, whoever is in power, right? Whether it's the Ukrainian government, the Russian government, the Biden administration, the Trump administration, right? I can sit there and call balls and strikes as I see them. And the reason I can do that is because you guys have my back. So those of you that support me at the specialist tier, lieutenant tier, colonel tier, you all get access to these uncensored combat videos. By the way, it's an archive. So you can literally go back through 3 years of war and watch the war evolve in real time via these videos, right? It's a no-brainer. The link is in the description. Check it out, combatvetnews.com. And of course, a huge thank you to all you guys that do support me. Now, one of the things that Russia's official stance has been is that their recruitment is robust, that Russians are knocking down the doors to serve their country in the special military operation, which, by the way, has an incredibly low casualty rate. Less than 10,000 Russians have been killed in this war. But then you have to ask yourself, why did Russia need to ramp up its bonuses again tremendously by almost 25%? In the southern Samara region, they are offering, no kidding, $40,000 sign-on bonuses. That is as much as the highest bonus in 2008 when the U.S. military was at the height of the Iraq War. Now, this is to join what they generously call high-risk assault squads, i.e. one-way assault squads, right? New soldiers, of course, don't learn that they're assigned to the assault groups until right before they deploy. Too late to back out. Some recruiters and their wives cited survival rates as low as 2 out of 50. That's 4% returning from recent attacks. 4% per attack, guys, right? The amount of training varies between 2 days and 2 weeks, highlighting the Russian military's urgent need for frontline reinforcements. Again, this is not, the fact is that when you look at Ukraine's personnel crisis, and Ukraine is in a personnel crisis, like, do not kid yourselves, but Ukraine is not shortening its training period to 2 weeks, right? Ukraine is not engaging like in this level of complete insane, just literally sticking people in a uniform, giving them a rifle, and ordering them to march is insane. One unnamed soldier said, "The 4 million right here is easy money. Of course, they're going to send us to get slaughtered. Nobody in our country just throws money around." This is an insane take, by the way. To be like, I am going to die, but man, this is easy money. Guys, is it easy money if it kills you? But I guess on one hand, if you're planning on drinking yourself to death anyway, it's as easy as any other money. Right? Now, this is, I think, actually a troubling sign. Because the fact is that this is not something you would do, right? Officials officially said recruitment numbers are high, but that you would not, if recruitment numbers were already high, why would you need to pay people more, right? Why would a Russian economy that's faltering, need to cough up even more preposterous sums of money? And truly, this is a preposterous sum of money for a sign-on bonus, right? When we do some purchasing power adjustments, $40K in Russia is something like a 2 or 300K sign-on bonus, right? The average monthly salary in Russia is about 700 USD, which means, of course, that $40,000. Let's see. Let's join me in doing math, because this continually just blows my mind. So $700 is the average monthly salary, meaning the average annual salary for a Russian, $8,400, right? Now, the average American's salary, we know, is about $36,000. So about, what's that, 4 times that? So a $40,000 sign-on bonus is actually like $160,000, almost $200,000 sign-on bonus for these one-way assault squads. That's not the sign of a thriving economy, guys. I don't know what else to tell you, right? And that's with the Russian ruble getting devalued by the day. So, I don't know, man. I wouldn't want to be a Russian. So I've never wanted to be a Russian soldier in this war, and I definitely, something should smell fishy. If someone knocks on their door and offers you $200K to join their squad, you should just say no, just on principle. But it sounds like Russia has found a nice little workaround. You see, a lot of Russians are Googling their missing friends and relatives, right? In fact, Ukraine has a hotline where Russians can call to check and see, hey, are you guys holding my son, daughter, dad, brother, uncle? And Ukraine said, we've gotten a lot of queries in the last month from Russian families. They're trying to see if their loved ones are being held in a Ukrainian prisoner of war camp. And the fact is that the hotline's called I Want to Find, and they've said that the number of people applying to see if their loved ones are POWs actually hit a record. It surged by up to 22%, and more than 60,000 requests for details of Russian missing troops. That's missing, by the way, guys. Right? since not every relative is going to call a Ukrainian hotline, and many of these missing troops don't need the hotline to tell them what has happened. But the fact is that 60,000 of these troops, that's a sign that a lot of Russians are being ground down. So the loss rate looks tremendous, right? Now, there are only 2,000 Russian soldiers that were ever in Ukrainian captivity. 408 have already been exchanged. But what I thought was most interesting, again, is a sign. This is all collectively a sign that you have a Russian sort of war machine that literally pulls people in, throws them into a meat grinder, that the Russian war machine is grinding harder, but it's getting less meat being inputted into it. And this is something where the debate that we often have here is, how is this reduction going to look? Is it going to be reduced like, for example, like you're drinking water out of a water bottle, right? When my water runs out, I'm going to be able to drink fully, and then it'll go and then it's out, right? Because it's like gas in your car. The car is either running or it doesn't. It's not like as you run out of gas, the car, like when you have a quarter tank, your car doesn't only go 75% as fast, right? You can drive your car as hard as you want on a quarter tank. It runs just as well on a quarter tank as it does on a full tank. But when it's empty, your car stops. Is that how the Russian recruitment pipeline is going to go, where there's people willing to sign up and then one day there's not? Obviously, it'll trickle down a little bit, but it's going to fall off like a cliff. Or is it going to be like a runner getting tired? They get more and more tired, they slow down more and more, and then eventually they simply become too exhausted to continue. That's the question. And when you see these spike in bonus payments, if we see a spike in bonus payments next month, I would say that it looks like it's a cliff that they're dropping off of. But that's like my opinion. Now, what I want to point out is that Russia is not alone in having these personnel crises, right? In fact, the Ukrainians are saying about 50,000 service members from all branches of Ukraine's armed forces are being transferred to the ground forces. This is pretty troubling because they are to reinforce combat brigades and initiate a rotation process, right? This is to give, again, the ability to provide a sustained rotation off the front line for many of these troops, right? While they're not, this is about 20% of all Ukrainian troops currently on the front line. It's going to take a lot longer to retrain these service members, but there's also a deeper problem, right? The resources are currently trained in training centers are only enough for a minimal replenishment of units, not the full support for the combat component. And thanks to these movements between troops as well as recruitment, we'll be able to do this. We already have an approved rotation plan, right? Now, the fact is that a lot of troops have said that ground troops have said, listen, we need to be rotated. This is exhausting. It's been years that we've been on the front lines, right? And it doesn't feel very fair to us. For example, an air defender can go to Kiev and he could be someone who's outside Kiev operating a Patriot missile battery where he gets to, he does a 12-hour shift and then he goes home, potentially to his own home. And so when you have this, the Ukrainians maybe are saying, hey, listen, we should try to distribute this issue, this burden more evenly across the armed forces. Now, the problem is that someone who's been, let's say, a drone pilot for 24 months, they are not going to be able to be tagged out by by someone who's been working a Patriot missile battery for those same 24 months, right? There has to be some kind of expertise pass through, right? And that is kind of one of the big questions here. It may be a case of, again, brigades that are currently in the rear are going to get plussed up by these ground troops. They're going to spend a couple of weeks training each other, and then they're going to get plopped in, and they're going to rotate out another troop where they'll get replenished, train together for 3 weeks, and then replace another brigade. And that process will grant some level of leave and refit to these units. And the nice thing is that if they can get a couple months of actual refit time, then they have more time to get plussed up with more soldiers. Those new soldiers will be trained better, right? I think the Ukrainians learned the hard way that they simply cannot raise wholesale new brigades to rotate in. It's just too difficult, right? And so again, what I'm seeing is just a very different sort of, it's not a recruitment crisis, but it is not quite, it doesn't have the same contours as Russia's recruitment crisis. Now, what I wanted to also talk about, we talked about these rare earth minerals being sold by the United States, but this isn't sold to the United States, excuse me. This isn't the only thing that's going on here, right? Yanukovych, right? You might remember this is the previous president of Ukraine who was extremely Russian, extremely pro-Russian. His son has made billions with a B selling coal from occupied Ukrainian territory, right? Now, Viktor Yanukovych, of course, was ousted in the political revolution in which the regular Ukrainians we're like, dude, this dude's a Russian shill. Get him out of our country. We want our elected leadership to be in charge. His son managed to score the rights to sell coal from Russia-occupied Ukrainian territories, particularly selling it to Turkey, right? Now, of course, if Viktor Yanukovych maintains, and Russia maintains, that Yanukovych was a completely neutral, pro-Ukrainian president who was ousted in a mean old CIA coup. But it seems strange then that as soon as the coup happened, he and his family fled to Russia, right? The exact playbook of Assad, who himself was also a Russian-backed dictator, right? And so Yanukovych Jr., in fact, was granted Russian citizenship a few months ago and is now created a coal export company, which seems to be essentially just a shell company that ostensibly owns the rights to the coal. This is something that actually even U.S. senators do, where they create a company that it doesn't own the trucks, it doesn't own the trains, it doesn't own the mines, it doesn't own the miners. It just has the rights to the coal itself. They have the right to facilitate the sale. Think of them as being like, hey, we're a middleman. We take the Turkish coal purchasers and we put them together with the Ukrainian coal miners and we take a cut. That is a classic way to sell rights for something, and it is a way to, it's almost rent seeking in nature, right? And this, I think, is just a sign of just kind of the fact that everyone in Ukraine everyone is self-interested in Ukraine. Like, don't kid yourself. And the Russians, again, for all their talk about, oh, we care about the Russian people, we're worried about the Russian government or the Ukrainian government, we're just trying to, whatever Putin's excuse of the day is, at the end of the day, he's doing one thing. He's taking his cronies and he's putting them in charge of key industries. This is a standard Russian playbook to find this core group of oligarchs, elevate them, put them into this position, which, by the way, remember, Russia, the Kremlin, can at any day wake up and go, oh, we should make it illegal to sell coal to Turkey. And they will destroy your business overnight. And that's part of it. The idea is that you lift somebody up, but when you lift them up, you make sure they know that the strings are attached to the Kremlin and that the Kremlin can cut those strings at any time, which means you aren't lifted up to new heights. It means you've become a puppet. And that's what's happened to Yanukovych and his son. They were probably always Russian puppets. Now, part of the Ukrainian, I should have done this in a different order, right? Part of the Ukrainian rotation plan also involves a pivoting to what they call a core system. This is something that we've talked about on this channel, that Ukraine relies on this brigade system, which is a throwback from the U.S. war in Iraq and Afghanistan, where they rotated a single brigade at a time. And within the country, there was only about maybe a corps or two's worth of troops in the country at any one time. During the height of the surge, you had about 100,000 troops there. But more typically in Afghanistan or Iraq, you saw like 50,000 troops. And the idea of having about 50,000 troops, that's, something like 10 brigades. So about 2 corps worth of brigades, maybe a little more, maybe 2 to 4 corps of brigades. But these brigades were constantly being rotated on and off the battlefield. And the idea was that there would never be a total wipe of the battlefield and a total replenishment of new troops at any one time. But the Ukrainians, this war is not conducive to that. And we've seen that when Ukraine tried to raise green, untrained brigades and just replace an entire existing brigade. It just doesn't work. So instead, they've said, listen, we're going to do a corps system. This means that the corps commanders are going to be the ones responsible for all the brigades under their command. And so they're going to effectively become like regional combat commanders. But in all likelihood, it's going to be more like, hey, you guys have to find a way within your corps to rotate brigades. Because as it stands, that's being done at the like 3-star level, right? And that is just not very efficient. It becomes overwhelming to sit there and be like, you have 20 brigades, you have to manage the rotations. It's too much, and it makes it too difficult. There's too big a gap between the brigade commander and that headquarters commander in Kiev. So I think this is all part of this sustainment plan to get to sort of like, think of it as like a railroad, a train that's the shift tracks. Ukraine has been in survival mode for 3 years, and it's settled into all these procedures and protocols of how replacements are done, how brigades are given orders, how things are assigned. And it has to painfully shift gears to have this sustainable combat pace that says, okay, there's a rotation. Units will fight for a designated period of time, and then they'll be rotated off the front lines. We're going to create something that's sustainable. Again, think of it as like sprinting. They've been sprinting for 3 years against the Russians, but now they go, listen, we would actually be faster if instead of sprinting, we tried to find a system that is sustainable, that's more like a jog, right? And the fact is that I think they're going to be able to pull it off. It's going to depend on the U.S. support. That's what it's going to come down to. Now, I wanted to talk about 2 things coming out of the administration. The first, Marco Rubio, baby. Marco Rubio. He is a reasonable, regular politician who finds himself doing some increasingly crazy shit, like going to El Salvador, which is not a problem, actually. El Salvador, right, has a massive gang problem that the president has actually cracked down on tremendously. Nayib Bukele has, in some ways, suspended the Constitution and really, declared a national emergency due to the absolutely overwhelming presence of drug gangs. And while his police have been absolutely brutal and his criminal justice system has thrown the book at just about everybody for just about everything, the result has been that El Salvador finally feels it's getting a handle on the gang problem. But he has said, listen, I'm happy to jail dangerous American criminals in custody in our country, including those with U.S. citizenship and legal residency. So there's a part of this that is actually a pretty good policy, and there's a part of this that is super fucked up. And if you're El Salvador, right? So here's the thing. Let's say you're an El Salvadorian migrant. You enter, you claim asylum, you get a court date in 5 years, and now you say, okay, you go and you commit a violent crime. In the U.S., you commit a violent crime, you are adjudicated by the Department of Justice. You are tried in a court or your State Department of Corrections. You're tried in a court, you're given a sentence, you serve your sentence, you're discharged. And oftentimes if you're a criminal with a serious criminal record, I don't mean like a bunch of parking tickets or you got drunk and threw something at your spouse. I mean like drugs, guns, serious crimes. What happens is, literally, you finish your sentence from your State Department of Corrections, ICE meets you at the door, and they don't even take off the handcuffs. ICE meets you, and they drive you to a detention center where you're held and then deported to your home country, right? The reason has to do with legality, right? In the United States, you commit a crime, right? States can't do deportations. That's not their job, but you violate state laws, you're going to be punished by the state, right? It has to do with our federal system. And it is pretty inefficient though, right? Especially because if you commit a crime, let's say I commit a crime in the United States and I flee to the UK. Well, I'll be arrested in the UK, but they'll send me back there. They'll send me back to the United States. But it doesn't work in reverse. If I commit a crime in the UK, right, sometimes the UK will say, hey, we're going to sentence you to this long, but we're going to extradite you to the United States and you'll serve your sentence there. That can happen sometimes. But generally, you do the time in the country whose laws you violated. But the government may say, listen, we're going to try a program to say, listen, if you really do something egregious and you're convicted and you're not a U.S. national, you're an El Salvadorian national, you're going to be deported, you should serve your sentence in El Salvador. That's not crazy. That's not like offensive to the very nature of justice. However, if you are a U.S. citizen or a legal resident, but the big gripe here is U.S. citizen, because a legal resident means that you have the same criminal justice system as a U.S. citizen and the same rights. If you're a U.S. citizen and you commit a crime in the United States, imagine if we were to arrest you and say, actually, we're going to have Dubai decide how long you should be punished for your crime. We're going to ship you to Russia. We're going to let Russia decide how long to punish you for your crime. That would be super, super fucked up and a violation of their rights. Right? The government cannot sit there and go, well, we're going to let your rights get violated, because we're going to outsource criminal justice to someone else, right? That's not how this can work, right? Just like the conditions in prison, right? It's very, very specific. It has to do with the rights against cruel and unusual punishment. That's in the Constitution. And so if you sit there and go, actually, you're a U.S. citizen, you committed a crime in the United States, but we're going to subject you to some other fucking country and their standards for criminal justice. Again, this is like a constitutional crisis level fuck up, right? It is prohibited to engage in cruel and unusual punishment, right? And let's see if we can find it. So the Constitution, I'll read it to you guys. The 8th Amendment of the U.S. Constitution prohibits cruel and unusual punishments and excessive bails and fines, right? It protects prisoners from cruel and unusual punishment while incarcerated. The right to humane living conditions, adequate medical care, and protection from violence, right? So cruel and unusual punishment includes torture devices, barbarous punishments, right? But it changes based on, well, the United States. And again, the evolving sense of what it means to be humane. I.e., think of it like the delta between living conditions on the outside and living conditions inside a prison, right? Because again, if you went to prison in 1900, you're not going to expect an internet connection. It doesn't exist. No one has an internet connection, right? But if you were to go to prison in, say, 2050, they may say, yeah, you're right to you have a basic right to watch TV, right? That's something that in 1920, a television set was a luxury. It wouldn't be in prisons, but now it's TV, dude. Just put it on. They have a right to TV, right? Maybe not TV specifically, but you see what I mean of not pointless deprivation, pointless cruelty. And so how do you know that a U.S. citizen protected by the 8th Amendment won't be subject to cruel and unusual punishment in an El Salvadorian prison, right? And this kind of I don't know what else to tell you. If I can't convince you that this is not pretty fucked up, does this appear cruel and unusual? Again, I'm not sitting there being like, oh, it's great to be a criminal, but I'm saying that the U.S. government, as we've pointed out, both sides have pointed out, the U.S. government does not always punish. They often let criminals get away, and people that are, we're going to say, not really all that criminal, sometimes get the book thrown at them. And that's why there's this prohibition on cruel and unusual punishment. Would living here appear cruel and unusual to you? Does this appear to be a cruel and unusual living condition for a prisoner? How about this? Does this image appear to be a cruel and unusual place to live? Does it seem pointlessly cruel, right? Even if you've done something bad? Maybe. Maybe. I'm going to go ahead and say probably. So again, when you see stories like this, put on your thinking cap. Ask yourself, why does the Constitution, right, the same thing that guarantees free speech or the right to bear arms, if you think those are important, then you have to care about the right and the prohibition against cruel and unusual punishment too. So again, an El Salvadorian who doesn't have status in the United States, you do your time in El Salvador. Okay, if you did something violent, yeah. It's tough to argue against that. You're going to get deported anyway. U.S. citizen, you are not going to get deported. You are protected by the 8th Amendment from a certain level of cruelty, and El Salvador will almost certainly subject you to that. And so the fact is that our elected leaders don't seem to care about this is really troubling. And again, I'm not somebody who's like Republican bad, Democrat good. Like, again, I have a fucking video where you can see me be like, Joe Biden, drop out. You're too fucking old. You're impotent and ineffective. But you also have to call balls and strikes, guys. And if one person is throwing more balls than someone else, I'm going to have to call that too. So again, I hope this is just talk. I hope this is just empty talk. But I worry when it's not. And then I have one final discussion point. Sputnik News. This is the official mouthpiece of the Russian government. And Sputnik News seems to be really excited to see that U.S. aid is getting spiked by Elon Musk. In fact, they are like, wow, Elon Musk has finally agreed with us that USAID is a criminal enterprise. And as I've pointed out, there are many things that I don't agree with that USAID does. I think they should be prohibited from engaging in any kind of social engineering or the like export of American values into other countries that may or may not want them. I think that's totally reasonable. But Elon Musk is not a judge. He cannot assess if something is criminal. He's not a prosecutor. If he believes he's seen evidence of a crime, then what he should do is call law enforcement, right? It is so fucking obvious. And he's besties with the president. And so you have to ask yourself, why is he saying these things, right? He's a world richest man. He makes good cars. But just because you can make a good car doesn't mean you can run a country. They're different fucking things. And the fact that he's out here saying these things, and the fact that Russia, of all countries, is like, yay, Elon, so smart, so good. Like, that should be a red flag. That's what's called a red flag, right? Again, this is the guy, sounds fucking stupid, but he cheats at video games. We can all see it. We all saw the fact that he made all these claims about being a world-ranked player in Diablo 2, something that has no meaning, that has no material impact, right? Like, why not just be a guy who loves video games but isn't that good at them? But if you're willing to lie about something with absolutely no impact, like, do you know anyone who lies about just zero impact stuff? Do you know anybody in your life who will lie about the fact that they'll say, I'm a jiu-jitsu black belt. And you go, no, you're not, dude. You've never trained in your life. But then they're totally scrupulous about their job or their marriage or the things that really matter. No, liars are just liars through and through. And so the fact is that that's probably who Elon Musk is. And so, allegedly, everything's alleged, right? And so the fact that Putin is out here praising him should just file that away in your mind, as it's going to be a Paul told you so kind of moment. And if you're on this channel and you listen this long, it's going to be, you're going to be able to tell your friends I told you so. So, stay with us, stay informed. That's what we're going to talk about. And I'll catch you guys in the next one, man. Hit that subscribe button. Oh, wait, we got to shout out our Combat Vet News members. Duh. Dude, I'm going to record this video right after this. It's going to be sick, dude. It is going to be awesome. Thanks to Martin Baum, Chris Rossi, Stuart Abel, Daniel Ron, Sergey Zinchenko, Chris Holmes, Chris Gorsuch, Daniel M., Ida Skycall, All of our lieutenant tier members couldn't do without you guys. The link is in the description. Sign up, join us, check out these videos. You're going to be fucking crazy because every time I get a text from this one guy from Liu, his videos are fucking insane. They're getting more insane, actually. See ya. Cheers.